When my cold husband passed out, he left me with nothing but debt, and a painting he made me swear never to touch. Turns out, it was worth millions. We lived in poverty for years, cutting corners, skipping vacations while that painting hung above our fireplace. And now? People are showing up because they want it back. They say grief comes in waves, but when my husband Henry died, it didn't wash over me, it trickled in. A slow, strange relief, followed by a silence I didn't quite trust. I was 52, a widow, and from what the lawyer said, a broke one. I'd spent 20 years married to Henry, who wore pressed shirts and disappointment like cologne. He came from old Charleston money, well, that's what he told people. But when the will was read, there was no trust fund, no hidden savings, no family estate. Just a pile of unpaid property taxes, and the house I was sitting in. Oh, and the painting, Mr. Franklin, our lawyer, added with a puzzled look, it's specifically mentioned here. He flipped the page and read aloud. The painting over the mantel shall not be removed, sold, or altered in any way. It is to remain where it hangs for Elise's safekeeping. I blinked. That hideous, moody landscape? A foggy mountain scene with a twisted tree and shadows that looked like ghosts? Henry had insisted it hang over the fireplace from the day we moved in. I'd hated it for years but left it alone. I always figured it was from his college art phase or some sentimental relic. Why would he? Mr. Franklin just shrugged. Some people are peculiar about art. Peculiar was putting it mildly. I didn't know it yet, but that ugly painting was about to become the center of a storm that would crack open every lie I'd built a life on. And the man who would help me see it clearly again? I hadn't met him yet, but I would. And he'd change everything. I stood there that night, just me and the painting, the fire below it crackling softly, casting strange shadows across the thick brush strokes. The tree in the center looked even more distorted in the low light, like it was reaching for something it couldn't touch. I poured a glass of wine, cheap but strong, and sat on the edge of the couch, arms wrapped tight around myself. "Why this?" I murmured aloud. "Why you?" Henry hadn't been a sentimental man. He was all about appearances. Our house was filled with curated antiques, and yet this one piece didn't match anything. It had always stood out, oddly modern, almost sinister, but he'd never explained it. Once, years ago, I'd asked about it. "It's important," he'd snapped. "Leave it alone." That was that. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I dragged a step stool in from the pantry and climbed up to get a closer look. The frame was heavier than I remembered, almost unnaturally so. I traced my fingers along the edge and felt something. A tiny latch, concealed in the molding. Click. The frame loosened just enough to lift it off the wall. I nearly dropped it. Because the back of the canvas wasn't sealed like a normal painting, it had been reinforced with wood slats, nailed down in a grid pattern. And underneath the center slat, something poked out, the corner of a leather envelope. Heart pounding, I pried the slat free with a butter knife. The envelope slid out easily. Inside, I found documents old, yellowed, and stamped with something official. There was also a receipt, handwritten in fading ink, and a certificate of appraisal from nearly 30 years ago. Appraisal value, $425,000. I blinked, reading it again. Then a third time. What in the world? I looked back at the canvas. That hideous thing? No, not hideous. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. That envelope clutched to my chest like a life raft. $425,000. Appraised in 1991. Which meant, if this thing had appreciated even slightly, it could be worth more now. Maybe even a lot more. The next morning, I skipped my usual routine. No tea, no toast, no morning news. I dressed in jeans and a sweater, slid the envelope into my purse, and headed downtown to a small art gallery Henry had always sneered at, called it hipster fluff. That alone made it my first stop. The bell chimed as I walked in, and a tall man looked up from behind the counter. He had silver hair, pulled into a short ponytail, and wore a navy button-down rolled at the sleeves. He looked like he belonged in Italy, not next to a rack of oil landscapes in North Carolina. "Good morning," he said, voice warm. "Looking for anything in particular?" "I might have something for you to look at," I said, unsure how to start. He tilted his head. Go on. I pulled the appraisal and the receipt from my purse and handed them over. He took one glance at the documents and stilled. His eyes narrowed as he examined the paper, then flicked up to meet mine. Where did you get this? It belonged to my husband, I said slowly. He passed away recently. Left this painting, it's over my mantel. I found these behind it. Do you have a photo? I did. I pulled out my phone and showed him the blurry shot I'd taken late last night. He stared at it for a long time, then let out a slow whistle. I'll be damned, he murmured. That's a Lewin Granger. A what? Lewin Granger, he repeated, voice reverent. He was a Southern abstract artist, very reclusive. Only worked between 1985 and 1993 before he disappeared. Never did more than 50 paintings. And most of them are in private collections. They're rare, very rare. I blinked. And you're sure that's one of them? He tapped the receipt. This provenance is gold. And the technique it matches. That distorted tree motif? Classic Granger. I stared at him. What would something like that go for now? He gave me a slow, deliberate smile. At auction? Depending on the buyers? $500,000. Maybe more. My knees actually buckled. I grabbed the edge of the counter. He reached out instinctively, steadying me. Sit, he said gently. Let me get you some water. I lowered myself into the chair as the numbers buzzed in my head. $500,000. And to think I almost took it down to put up a mirror from Pottery Barn. When he returned, he handed me a cold glass and sat across from me. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't even get your name. He smiled. Adrian Bishop. I run this place. Elise Warren. I replied, and something about the way he said my name made me feel seen. Actually seen. He glanced back at the paperwork. Elise, I hate to say this, but if people find out what you've got, it may not be just collectors knocking on your door. I frowned. What do you mean? I mean, he said carefully, someone clearly knew what this was and hid it. The question is, why? I drove home in a daze. Adrian had offered to help me get a second appraisal, discreetly, with someone he trusted, someone who wouldn't broadcast the find to the art world before I was ready. I'd agreed, though I couldn't stop shaking long enough to finish my glass of water. $500,000. For years. That thing hung over my mantel while I clipped coupons and worried about the heating bill. While Henry scoffed at my suggestion to take a weekend trip or repaint the guest room, he always said money was tight, that his investments were long-term. Turns out the long-term investment had been staring me in the face the whole time. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. There was more to this. I could feel it deep in my bones. I walked straight to Henry's office, the one I used to avoid because he always snapped when I rearranged anything. It still smelled like old paper and bitterness. His filing cabinet was locked, but I'd found the key months ago taped under his desk drawer. I opened it and flipped through files, mostly insurance papers, real estate documents, tax returns. Then, one slim folder labeled simply, Granger. My breath caught. Inside were black and white photographs, different angles of the painting. Notes in Henry's tidy script, dates, auction numbers, names. A letter, typed on thin paper, from a man named Leonard Wexler in Atlanta. The tone was hushed, urgent. Henry, as we discussed, keeping the piece unregistered is the safest option for now. Lewin would have wanted it that way. It's one of the few he never cataloged, which works in your favor. Let it age. Keep it close. When the time is right, we'll talk. LW unregistered? Uncatalogued? Was this stolen? I leaned back on my heels, nausea curling in my gut. If this letter was right, then Henry had been hiding something far bigger than money. He'd kept a painting off the books for decades, which begged the question, what exactly did he plan to do with it? And why had he never sold it, even when we were scraping by? I gathered the papers and locked the cabinet behind me. One thing was becoming clear. Henry had secrets buried in every corner of this house. And apparently, so did Lewin Granger. By the time I returned to the gallery with the documents, Adrian had already made a few calls. He waved me inside and pulled down the shade on the front door. I hope you don't mind, he said, but I spoke to someone who's a bit of a Lewin Granger scholar. I blinked. That's a thing? He smiled. In certain circles. He's got a cult following. His disappearance made him sort of mythic. Some people think he staged it. Others think he died, and his work's being hoarded by a private collector. I set the file down between us. I think my husband might have been that collector. Adrian flipped through the documents slowly, pausing at the letter from Leonard Wexler. I know that name, he muttered. You do? He nodded. Wexler ran a private dealing firm in Atlanta, operated in legal gray zones, quiet transfers, undocumented works, that sort of thing. Disappeared after the IRS came sniffing around 10 years ago. He handed the letter back to me, tapping it once. This proves something bigger, Elise. If what your husband had was an uncatalogued Granger, it could be the missing piece collectors have been whispering about for years. So what do I do? He looked at me, eyes steady. You decide if you want to step into the storm. Because once this gets out, you'll have a line of people claiming rights. A few lawyers. Maybe even some distant family of Grangers. I swallowed. There's more, I said quietly. I think Henry was planning to sell it. Eventually. But something held him back. Adrian nodded. Maybe guilt. Maybe greed. Then he paused. Have you ever wondered why he left it to you? Specifically. I stared at him. I mean, men like Henry don't usually hand over $500,000 paintings to the wives they spent years undervaluing. I laughed, a little too hard. He didn't value any part of me except how well I could make a casserole. Adrian leaned forward. Then maybe he left it for you out of guilt. Or maybe he hesitated. Maybe he never meant for you to find what was behind it. I let that sink in. Because now I was starting to wonder if Henry had hidden more than documents. Maybe he'd hidden the truth of who he really was. And the painting? That wasn't just art. It was a key. It was dusk when I got home, the sky painted in soft streaks of orange and lavender. I was still holding the weight of Adrian's words like a stone in my chest. Maybe he never meant for you to find what was behind it. I walked into the house and immediately checked the painting. Still there, centered over the fireplace, like it always had been. But now it looked different, heavier, like it knew it was being watched. I was halfway through reheating soup when the knock came. Firm. Measured. Not friendly. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened the door. A woman stood on my porch, early 40s, slim, with sharp cheekbones and a blazer too nice for casual errands. She held a black leather portfolio against her chest, like a shield. Elise Warren, she asked crisply. Yes, I'm Vanessa Granger. Lewin Granger was my uncle. My stomach dropped. I was told there may be a painting here. One of his last works. I'd like to see it. I blinked. Told by who? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Let's just say, news travels fast when money's involved. I didn't move. Do you have proof of who you are? She pulled a thin file from her portfolio, flipped it open. Birth certificate. Family tree. Photos of Lewin in his younger years, eyes identical to hers. Same jawline. Same darkness in the stare. I'm not here to fight you, she added. Not yet. Well, that's comforting, I muttered. Her eyes narrowed. I want to know how it got here. That piece was never officially sold. It vanished, just like my uncle. And you're telling me your husband, some accountant from North Carolina, just happened to have it? My jaw tensed. He wasn't an accountant. He was complicated. She stepped closer. Look, I'm not accusing you. I'm just saying, if that painting was stolen, there could be legal consequences. For you. I stared at her. So what do you want? To take it? No, she said. I want to work with you. If it's real, and it's the missing Granger, we're sitting on something historic. But we need to get ahead of this. Fast. Before others start coming. I didn't like her tone. Too polished. Too controlled. But something about the way she said others made me pause. You think someone else knows? Vanessa gave a grim nod. You said your husband hid it for 30 years. If someone helped him, or wanted it, they're not going to stay quiet now. I looked over my shoulder, through the entryway, past the chandelier to the fireplace. The painting seemed to stare back. Tomorrow, I said finally. You can come see it. 10 a.m. She nodded, then handed me her card. Don't do anything until then. As she walked down the path and disappeared into a sleek black car, I stood frozen on the porch, because I wasn't sure if I was protecting the painting anymore, or if it was protecting me. Vanessa arrived at exactly 10 a.m. the next morning, just like she said. No smile. No warm greeting. Just a curt nod and a crisp, "May I come in?" I stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. It's right where it's always been. She walked straight to the fireplace, portfolio still under her arm, eyes scanning the canvas like it was a missing person. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "My mother had one just like it. Granger called them his ghost trees. He only painted them when he was spiraling." "Spiraling?" She nodded, fingers grazing the edge of the frame. "He struggled. With everything. Obsession. Isolation. He disappeared before I ever really got to know him, but my mother said he couldn't stop painting once he started." I folded my arms. "So how does a piece like that go missing?" Vanessa turned, meeting my eyes. "Same way a man does, I guess." Slowly. Then, all at once, she opened her portfolio and pulled out a tablet. "May I?" I nodded. She snapped several high-resolution photos of the canvas, zooming in on the brushwork, the signature, barely visible at the base of the tree, in a charcoal smear, LG. Then she handed me a document. "This is a preliminary verification form. If you agree to it, I'll submit it to the Granger estate archivist. It starts the process." Quietly, I skimmed the form. "And what does that do for me?" "If it's real, you're holding one of the most valuable lost artworks in Southern history," she said. "You get verification, provenance, the ability to sell or donate with a clean record." "And what do you get?" She smiled, finally. Not kindly. "A piece of the legacy my family lost." I hesitated. "What if I say no?" Her smile didn't falter. "Then I walk. But others won't. And I guarantee you, whoever helped your husband keep this quiet, they won't knock on the door and ask nicely." That sent a chill down my spine. Because she was right. Henry had hidden this for decades. That letter from Wexler wasn't just advice, it was a warning. And now, a Granger relative was in my living room, offering protection in exchange for truth. But before I could answer, a knock echoed through the house. Vanessa's eyes darted to the door. "You expecting anyone?" she asked. I shook my head. "No." I moved cautiously, opened the front door just a crack and froze. A man stood there, mid-60s, pinstripe suit, thin-rimmed glasses, and a briefcase that looked more expensive than my car. He smiled with a flash of 2 white teeth. "Mrs. Warren, my name is Harold Linley. I represent an interested party regarding the Granger piece in your possession." Vanessa was already at my shoulder. "Too late," she muttered under her breath. "They're here." Harold Linley looked like a man who never lost. Everything about him was slick. His shoes, his smile, the way he angled his body like he already had one foot inside. His voice was smooth enough to oil hinges. "I won't take much of your time," he said, offering a business card I didn't take. "I represent a private collector who's deeply interested in preserving Southern art. Word reached him that a long-lost Granger may have resurfaced, right here." I glanced at Vanessa beside me. Her arms were crossed, jaw tight. "We're not interested," she said flatly. "I wasn't speaking to you, Miss Granger," Harold replied, turning his full attention back to me. "May I come in, Mrs. Warren?" My instincts screamed, no, but I was raised Southern, which meant I let him in anyway. He stepped into the foyer and immediately gravitated toward the fireplace like a moth to a flame. Vanessa and I followed, flanking him like wary guards. He stood before the painting in silence, then let out a low, appreciative whistle. "Incredible. I never thought I'd lay eyes on it." "You've seen it before?" I asked. He smiled. "Not in person. But it's known. The Ghost Tree in Fog. Number 48. The final Granger before he vanished." Vanessa's head snapped up. "There were only 47 documented." "Exactly," he said, turning. "This one was rumored, but never confirmed. A whisper among curators. Until now." My pulse thudded in my ears. Harold stepped forward, pulling a folded document from his briefcase. "My client is prepared to offer a substantial sum in exchange for immediate transfer. $750,000. I almost dropped to the floor. Vanessa's hand shot out. "Absolutely not." He ignored her, holding the papers toward me. "Clean transaction. No publicity. The painting will be preserved and protected in a private estate." I stared at the contract. It was real. Official. backed by someone with serious money. And yet, something in his tone felt off. Like this wasn't an offer. It was a warning wrapped in charm. "Who is your client?" I asked. He didn't blink. "Confidential." "Was he connected to my husband?" Harold's smile flickered. "That's irrelevant." "Then it's a no," Vanessa said firmly, stepping between us. Harold didn't argue. He just closed his briefcase slowly, like a man rehearsing a chess move. "You may want to consider what kind of attention this piece will attract," he said. Voice low now. "Intimate. These things have a way of complicating life." My jaw clenched. "Is that a threat?" "Of course not," he said, smiling. "It's a courtesy." And with that, he turned and walked out, his cologne lingering in the hall like a cloud of expensive menace. I closed the door and locked it. Vanessa turned to me. "Now do you believe me?" I nodded, heart pounding. She crossed her arms. "We've got to move fast." "Move?" I echoed. "Move what?" She looked at the painting. "The game's begun." "And that canvas?" Her eyes narrowed. "It's the queen on the board." The house felt smaller after Harold left. I kept expecting to hear his shoes click back across the hardwood, his polite threats echoing down the hallway. But it was quiet, too quiet, like the walls were holding their breath. Vanessa paced the living room. "This is bigger than just art. That man didn't come here to negotiate. He came to intimidate." I sat down slowly. "What happens if we don't sell?" She looked at me dead on. "Then we find out how badly someone else wants it." I glanced at the painting, once an ugly fixture, now a target. "I need to know more," I said. "About Henry. About how he got this." Vanessa nodded. "Then we start with the one name in that letter. Wexler." She pulled out her phone and started typing. "Leonard Wexler. Atlanta. He was a dealer, right? I'll check art registries, private sales records." I got up and retrieved the Granger folder from the filing cabinet again. There, tucked between Henry's notes and sketches, was something I hadn't noticed before: a crumpled receipt. Dated 1992. Cash payment. No business name, just a P.O. box in Georgia, and scrawled at the bottom in Henry's careful print, "Wex. Keep quiet. Final." I handed it to Vanessa, who scanned it and swore under her breath. "I've seen this handwriting before," she murmured. "You have?" She held up her phone. On the screen was a digitized scan of an old gallery invoice from an archived court case involving stolen artwork. Same script, same style. "Your husband dealt with Wexler right before the feds started sniffing around," she said. "He must have bought the Granger under the table, no tax, no paperwork, nothing that could trace it. So, Henry knew it was risky," she nodded. "Which is probably why he hid it. He wasn't protecting you. He was protecting himself." That stung, even though I shouldn't have been surprised. Henry protected what he owned, not who he loved. Vanessa turned her phone around again. And here's the kicker. The screen showed a grainy photo of Wexler. Older, thinner, but alive. Taken last year. I blinked. "He's still out there?" "Oh yeah," she said grimly. "And if Harold Linley came knocking, you can bet someone already told Wexler his long-lost painting just resurfaced." I stared at her. "You think he'll come?" Vanessa's expression darkened. "I think he never left. It was past midnight when I heard the noise. Not a knock, not a creak. Just a soft thud from the back porch. Vanessa had gone home hours ago, promising to call her contact at the Granger estate first thing in the morning. I'd poured myself a glass of wine and sat curled on the couch, watching the shadows stretch across the hardwood floors as the fire died down. But that thud pulled me upright. I moved slowly, barefoot, heart racing, and eased open the back door. At first, I saw nothing. Just moonlight pouring over the patio stones. Then I looked down. An envelope. No stamp. No name. Just one word, written in tiny block letters across the front. "Return." My breath hitched. I crouched, snatched it up, and darted back inside, bolting the door behind me. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed, "Mrs. Warren, the painting you possess is not yours. It was acquired under false pretense and must be returned to its original intended recipient. You have 72 hours to comply. After that, discretion will no longer be an option." A friend of the artist. I read it twice, then a third time. There was no contact number, no signature, but the message was clear. I picked up my phone and called Vanessa. She answered on the second ring. What happened? I read the note aloud. I could hear her breathing quicken on the other end. Jesus, she muttered. They're escalating. Should I call the police? Not yet, she said. Not unless they step foot inside. That note is vague enough to mean anything, and the last thing you need is the local sheriff telling the whole town you've got a six-figure painting in your living room. My stomach twisted. So what do? Secure the painting. And listen to me, Elise, don't be alone. I'm coming back first thing in the morning. And I'm bringing someone who knows how to deal with people like this. After we hung up, I went to the fireplace. For the first time since Henry died, I took the painting off the wall. It was heavier than I remembered. Thick canvas, reinforced frame, like it was built to outlive everyone who ever touched it. I leaned it gently against the wall in the guest room, unlocked the door. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, the note still in my hand, heart pounding. They'd been watching me. They knew where I lived, what I had. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't some grieving widow anymore. They thought I'd hand it over, just like that. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Vanessa arrived just after dawn, but she wasn't alone. A man stepped out of her car with her late 40s, tall, tightly wound in a gray wool coat, and with the kind of posture that screamed former military. He scanned the front of my house like it was a tactical zone. Elise, Vanessa said briskly, this is Graham Voss. He's handled private security for some of the biggest art transfers in the country. And he doesn't scare easily. I don't scare at all, he said, extending a hand. His voice was quiet but firm. You got the note? I handed it over. He read it once, then folded it crisply. They're testing you, trying to rattle you. It worked, I said, not even trying to hide it. He nodded. We'll turn that to our advantage. Vanessa pulled out her tablet and opened a satellite map of the area. We've got 3 roads in, 2 security cameras facing the front. But your backyard's exposed. Graham stepped in. I'll install temporary motion sensors this afternoon. But we need a bigger plan. If we wait for them to make a move, we're always behind. I frowned. So what? We bait them? He didn't flinch. Exactly. Vanessa slid me a burner phone. We're going to announce the painting quietly. Just a whisper through the right private collector circles. A possible Granger discovery. No location, no name. We let them come looking. I stiffened. And what happens when they do? Graham's gaze was steady. We let them reveal who they are. It sounded risky, dangerous. But deep down, I knew it was time. Henry had spent 30 years hiding the truth. Now it was my turn to drag it out into the light. We staged everything. The painting was moved to a rented art vault in Charlotte, placed under a false name. A decoy, a near-perfect replica made by a restoration artist Graham trusted, was hung back over the fireplace. It looked identical. The kind of copy only someone with forensic tools could tell apart. By nightfall, the message had gone out to a dozen carefully selected names in the underground collectors network. Vanessa leaned back from her laptop, exhaling slowly. It's out there. Graham checked his watch. Now we wait. I looked between them. What if they don't come? Vanessa's voice was calm. Oh, they'll come. And just like clockwork, 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. When I checked the porch, there was no one there, only a single envelope wedged into the wreath. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded. It was of Lewin Granger, standing in front of my house. I stared at the photograph for a long time. Lewin Granger. Same sunken cheeks. Same storm-filled eyes Vanessa had shown me in her family photos. Only this time, he wasn't in a studio or gallery. He was on my front porch. And in the background, barely visible, was a younger version of Henry, watching from the doorway. When Vanessa saw it, she went silent. That's proof, she finally said, voice hollow. My uncle was here. Graham studied the photo under a desk lamp, using a small magnifier. Taken sometime in the early 90s. Looks like fall. October, maybe. I swallowed hard. So they knew each other. More than that, Vanessa murmured. I think your husband was the last person to see him. My knees gave out, and I sank into a chair. My living room suddenly felt colder, like echoes of old conversations were hiding in the walls. Vanessa sat beside me. Do you remember anything? Anyone showing up? Any story Henry told about how he got the painting? I tried to think, Tried to pull from the corners of memories I'd long since filed away as unimportant, and then suddenly, I did remember. A night. Rain hammering the roof. I'd been upstairs folding laundry when Henry had slammed the front door. Voices angry, low filtered up through the vents. A man shouting, "You can't just hide it forever!" And Henry barking back, "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore." I remembered peeking down the staircase and seeing a tall, gaunt man drenched, wild-eyed, holding something wrapped in canvas. The man left not long after, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the hallway wall. I'd asked Henry who it was. He said, "Nobody. Just a drunk." But it wasn't nobody. It was Granger. I told Vanessa and Graham everything. Vanessa's face turned pale. That may have been the last night anyone ever saw him. Graham folded his arms. "If that's true, your husband didn't just steal a painting." My heart pounded. "You think he looked at me carefully. "Let's just say if Lewin Granger disappeared after that night, and your husband had the last known piece of his work, there's a trail here someone doesn't want uncovered." I stood slowly, the weight of it all pressing into my chest like wet cement. Henry hadn't just kept a secret. He may have buried a man's legacy, and with it, the truth. Vanessa's phone buzzed. She looked down, then gasped. "It's from a collector's forum," she said. "Someone just posted. The ghost tree is real. We know where it is." The widows made her move. I stepped back. "They're watching us," I whispered. "Everything we do." Graham turned off the lights, his voice low and deliberate. "Then it's time we show them exactly what they came for." We set the trap. Graham stayed close, monitoring the motion sensors he'd placed all around the house. Vanessa worked her contacts in the art world, feeding carefully curated leaks enough to make it seem like I was preparing to auction the painting publicly. By nightfall, the house was buzzing with a still tension. And just after midnight, they came. 2 men. One stayed by the car, engine still running. The other walked straight up the drive and didn't bother hiding his face. Harold Linley. Same slick suit, same chilling smile. He didn't knock. Just stepped onto the porch and looked straight at the camera Graham had angled at the door. Vanessa whispered, "Let him knock. We want the entry attempt on video." But Harold didn't knock. He reached into his coat and pulled out my front door key. I gasped. That snake, he must have made a copy while Henry was alive. Graham didn't wait. He flung the door open just as Harold slipped the key into the lock. "I'd stop right there," he said calmly, gun holstered but visible. "You're on private property, caught on 5 cameras, and you just attempted unlawful entry with a copied key." Harold blinked, thrown off. "Mrs. Warren invited me." "She did not," I said, stepping into view behind Graham, heart pounding but steady. His smile faded. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Elise." I tilted my head. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A stolen painting, a web of lies, and a man willing to trespass to protect the wrong story." Harold tried again. "That painting belongs to my client." I held up my phone and played a recording. Vanessa had captured it earlier that week. Harold admitting his client had never formally owned the painting, but was entitled to it by preservation rights, which, according to Graham's legal team, meant nothing. "You're done here," Graham said. "I've already filed a report with the local DA. And this time? Your threats were caught on video." Harold's expression shifted from cool confidence to something sour. Defeated, he backed off the porch. But before he turned, he said one last thing. "You should have just sold it. Quietly." I met his gaze head on. "No," I said. "I'm going to show the world what my husband tried to hide." A sighed.